Today we're going to be talking about the respiratory system. And we're going to talk about all the membranes, pressures, mechanisms that make ventilation possible. And so let's start with that. So first we have a few definitions here, but we're going to go over the layers of the pleura. There is the parietal pleura, which is the outside that lines the thoracic cavity. That's what's on your ribs. And then there's a cavity right there that we call the pleural cavity. That's in between that and the visceral pleura, which is on the lung. Bronchioles, alveoli, which would be the very tiny filled sacs at the very where gas exchange actually occurs. So, a few things we want to go over is the pressures. How do we make a pressure gradient? It's through this little thing called Boyle's law, which is pressure and volume are inverse. Pressure on the gas increases. If pressure on gas increases, its volume decreases. Pretty self-explanatory, but that's what makes pressure gradients possible. This is how air is getting into our lungs. And so we got a couple of different pressures. Here are the main ones we're going to be concerned with and what those mean. So your intrapulmonary pressure, your P-pole, is usually 0. And that's just the pressure inside your lung. Intrapleural pressure, that's going to be negative. And your atmospheric pressure, again, is 0. So there's a couple more. There's transpulmonary pressure, transthoracic pressure, and transrespiratory pressure. Usually we deal with this one. So, mechanism. So, we always need a negative pressure in the intrapleural because that's what creates the vacuum that we suck in air with. So, well, technically it's our respiratory pressure, but this is what does it with volume. So, for example, inspiration, we get our respiratory pressure, your alveolar pressure, this guy, which is also intrapulmonary pressure. We get that to -1. And because of that, we're going to want to suck air in because it's a gradient. Expiration is +1, it just does the opposite. We need the intrapleural pressure in the pleural cavity be negative because that's what is creating this volume that creates a negative pressure. So lymph vessels constantly pump fluid out, creating a vacuum. Lung elastic pulls inward, chest walls pull outward. So we got this pull, we're trying to pull apart. That's our intrapleural pressure. Transpulmonary pressure right here. Bang, bang. That's what keeps the lungs inflated, bigger or smaller, and whatnot. Okay, let's go over surfactant. Surfactant is amphipathic. It has a polar head and nonpolar tails. And this helps with the surface tension, which has water. Water lines the alveoli, and it actually wants to collapse in on itself because water is trying to go to itself. And so, right here, there we go, without surfactant. But surfactant kind of relieves that pressure off of them and keeps it off. So, law of Laplace, large vessels require less pressure to stay open. Small vessels require more pressure to stay open. So, high pressure, we are in collapse risk for small alveoli. So, pneumothorax, air in the pleural cavity, negative pressure in the pleura is compromised. So this is from like your gunshot, your stab wounds. Air accumulates and thoracic rises, pressure in the rises, which pushes major veins, and cardiac output. So, rapidly fatal. Tension in the pneumothorax, air enters the pleural cavity during inspiration, but can't escape during it. It creates this one-way valve, and so then it follows this mechanism of action. So, we're going to have a PV loops real quick. How much volume you need to change pressure. So, we use these a lot of the times to calculate work, but still a reminder, elasticity is tendency to collapse, compliance is tendency to fill, too much elasticity, hard to inhale, too much compliance, hard to exhale, surfactant increases compliance. So, yeah, lung with air, surface tension would take this and we'd make it to the right, as you can see right here. Because if we had increased surface tension, we'd need more pressure and we wouldn't be able to fill as much. So, lung with no surface tension, we'd be able to just fill it and right away. This actually demonstrates something interesting. Lungs have intrinsic elasticity. It's not just contingent on surface tension. So, lastly, we have tidal volume. Not good for lungs to fully inflate or deflate. So, it's actually looking like this. This is maximum. This is minimum. So, yeah, and here we go. This nice graph of the works. But just a little reminder here. This elastic work is just it's kind of a passive process. This is an active process. And so, inspiratory, there's a lot more work actually happening here. So this graph isn't actually indicating the amount of work, just where the work is. So it takes a lot more work to inspire than it does to expire. So as you can see, that would this right here is elastic work against and elastic work there. So yep, and then these help us determine work because PV loops help visualize work because work is pressure times volume. Here's the derivative. So here's how decreased compliance, which is restrictive lung disease, here's how that would affect it is you would actually come out here and you come out farther because you're stiffer and then go up. And so it looks like kind of like that. And then with increased compliance, you come out the same, but then your exhale becomes extremely difficult. And you actually have to come here and you actually have to do work to get it back to the negative pressures. So, lastly, we're going to look at the total work. This is more stiff. Your airflow would actually, if you had a less stiff, you'd have a lot more airflow. If you had more stiff, you have a little flatter of an airflow, a little bit more work. But as you can see, your elasticity just kind of stays the same, more or less, even though we're talking about more stiff. So a little bit of flaw in this graph. You can see that it kind of changes. The position of elasticity. So breathing, you can see is on this line. And breathing rate, when you're more stiff, look how much more elasticity, how much more work you have to do to fill those lungs. Versus this one, your lungs have to do a lot more work, but in a different capacity. As in, it's got to push it not as fast. So it's a lot more on the elastic. But this one's a lot faster. That's why our work is so much higher here. So anyways, that is the pulmonary system.